FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome, and you are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. It's May 22nd, 2018. So you're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. I guess there are 3 types of people in the world: people who create problems, people who solve them, and carriers. And you got your choice which one you want to be. As always, be part of the show. Make my day. Let me see your email in my email inbox in the morning, kl@kerrylutz.com. So more about solutions and problems. Person you're about to hear from, been listening to the show for years, of course, doesn't agree with everything I say. You know what? Sometimes I don't agree with everything I say either. But nonetheless, he is out there trying to make a difference. He's a dyed-in-the-wool libertarian, and where others see problems, Derrick Michael Reid, you see solutions. You're running on the Libertarian ticket for senator from California, and I welcome you to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Kerry. I've been looking forward to this.
Likewise. So your background is impeccable. Really, if you had to pick the person you want to be in the Senate, and you looked at their CV, their curriculum vitae, you would say you are the perfect person. You're electronic engineer, patent lawyer, system analyst, military scientist, market analyst, and geopolitical analyst. I mean, it sounds like if the people of California gave it any thought, they wouldn't even hesitate to pull the lever or hit the button or punch the Chad, whatever you guys do in California. They wouldn't even think about it. They would just vote for you.
Well, I hope so. But let me go a little bit further into that. You just ripped off 6 different skills that I have: engineer, lawyer, systems analyst, military scientist, geopolitical analyst, and bullion banking finance analyst. Those are 6. Now, I'm a 6 Sigma person. There are a few hundred of us in the country. However, my particular skill set is geared to be able to get my head around the world, understand Washington, D.C., understand the problems, understand the systemic causes of those problems, and then be able to devise a comprehensive solution set, how to fix D.C. I was an engineer. That was my first profession. And I'm innately a problem solver. I say, okay, here's a problem. Okay, let's solve it. And that's what I've done over the last couple of years. I ran for the U.S. presidency in 2016, trying to get the Libertarian nomination. It was the first time I came out of the box. So I figured, what would be the best place for me to work in government? And the president would be it, because I'd want to solve all of these problems.
Mm-hmm. So 2016, you run for president and run for Libertarian candidate, which actually we got a few votes in 2016, even though Gary Johnson was the person who wound up being the candidate. You think things would have been different if you were there?
I think things that would have been different. I did a YouTube on Gary Johnson, McAfee, Kerry, and Peterson, which were the top 4 runners. I did a videotape, and I went through and I described these guys about how they were not presidential. You see, in order to get elected, you've got to be able to do 2 things. You've got to be able to first have a message that attracts 90% of the people.
Right. Resonates. It resonates.
Yes. Then you have to have a solution set. This is how I'm going to fix things. Now, when the libertarians come off with their anarchy, their sovereignty, their opposition to the drug war, people kind of put them over on the side as being a little bit out there. I'm a moderate libertarian. In fact, I'm actually a moderate liberal, a classic liberal, and I'm actually a moderate conservative. I'm kind of like right in the middle between Democrat, Republican, and Libertarian. Now, what I did is as a moderate libertarian, I could speak to the people and give them messages that they would want to hear. And I can give you an example if you would like one.
Sure.
Okay. Most libertarians, they believe in sovereignty. I can do anything I want, and they want to end the war on drugs. Okay,
right.
Fine. Now, you and I both understand the practical realities of the day. This opioid crisis, they're dropping like flies out there. We have the international banking cabal running Afghan heroin into this country. I mean, it's just out there in the streets. Now, unless you have the social services in place to be able to accommodate legalized drugs, you're going to create a catastrophe. And none of the states are really set up to do that. So what I do as a libertarian, I say, look, what I am going to do is I am going to translate the hardcore libertarian view of opposition to the drug war into the opposition to federal totalitarianism. And it goes like this. If California wants to vote for legalized marijuana, for example, I, as a libertarian, the U.S. Constitution is my playbook. Liberty, freedom, prosperity, and peace are my objectives. Mm-hmm. I say to the common folk out there, I want to have a war on D.C. totalitarianism. It's not D.C.'s business to dictate social issues to the many states. Under our Constitution, we have sovereign states that are that control the social issues, whereas the federal government controls more of intrastate trade, military,
defense, right.
Federal issues. Yeah, that kind of thing. And so there's a dichotomy there. Yeah. So that is one way. I sit there and I don't screech to people and the war on drugs. What I say is, let's get back to our constitutional roots and limit federal totalitarianism. Do you see the difference, Kerry?
Oh, of course. And you've been listening to the show long enough to know that is a common issue that we address on the show is governmental overcreep. And look, when it comes to legalizing pot, that's one thing. I mean, arguably, it's been legal in one way or another, marijuana, for many, many years, just by virtue of its decriminalization. And in a way, that's even worse because it's enabled the selective enforcement of drug laws against individuals, and bad things have come about it. So I totally am with you that if you just legalized everything all at once, at some point it could be worse than it is. Others, no. Look what they did in Portugal with legalizing all drugs, and they've actually seen drug use go down. Now, I don't know. I haven't seen any reports on narco-tourism there. That could have very well taken off as a result, but they seem to be doing okay in Portugal. Will that work for the U.S.? I don't know, but all we can do is look for examples around the world where it's been done. Uruguay legalized marijuana, right?
Right. Well, personally, I'm a Christian and I'm a social conservative, which makes me a very unusual type of libertarian.
Yeah.
I don't want to see college kids in their best years sitting around smoking dope, vegging out in front of the video games. They're in their most productive years. I don't agree with it, especially for the young kids who have their whole lives. But we have a constitution, and I think our constitution needs to be respected in terms of states' rights.
Yeah, agreed. It should be a states' right issue. Look, there's things that kids do a lot worse than marijuana. You could argue whether or not it's a gateway drug or not, but younger people, it's not a good idea for them to be taking Ritalin or SSRI drugs or marijuana. The developing mind is very, very, it is resilient, and it is, it can take a licking and keep on ticking, right? But there are certain things that are going to mess it up. So, all right, so let's go back to issues. What about the issue of gambling? So we just had the Supreme Court strike down the ban, or the monopoly, if you will, for sports gaming only in Nevada. Okay. Now every state will be able to have it. Do we want to, is it right for the government to be legislating morality, if you will, or trying to control the inhabitants from potentially self-destructive behavior?
Again, I go back to the Constitution. Generally, the states have reserved power to control social issues. I consider alcohol, tobacco, drugs, gambling, all of those neat little vices that we humans have. These are basically social issues. If the federal government wants to get involved with the drug war in a serious way, they go after the international banking cabal and shut down Afghanistan. And I think Trump does see the drugs coming in through the southern border.
Oh, yes.
And I think he's making a play there. I mean, it's one thing to sit there and say, okay, if you want to do some drugs, you have the right to do so. It's another thing to import tonnage and tonnage and tonnage of heroin from foreign countries to destroy this country for the purposes of making it more pliable to align itself with a new world order, one world communist government, which is at the highest point the main objective. Yet most of the problems can be viewed in this perspective. And if you don't mind, Kerry, I'd like to make a statement here about what got me off the couch and running for the president.
I was getting to that. So please share with us, Derrick, like your journey here. Why you obviously sound like you had a pretty comfortable life. You had things pretty set. It sounded like things were good. And yet you get into this mess. So yeah, tell us how this happened.
I walked away from a $250,000 job. I said, I am going to now pledge to live a life of poverty, and I'm going to try to help the country because it has a tremendous number of problems.
Yeah, agreed. A lot of problems, bigly.
Okay, so with that Six Sigma skill set, I'm basically able to understand a lot of things. Now, what I basically came to the conclusion is that there is a power that is out there, and I cannot articulate it. I do know that 4 presidents, Bush Sr., Clinton, Bush Jr., and BHO, all referred to this New World Order. And I've heard quotes from the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. Okay, now I am somebody in my garage. I look at open source material just like you do, Kerry.
Right.
I'm not in the back room, so I can only put pieces together. Now, this New World Order, I don't know what its membership is, whether or not it includes the Bilderbergs, the Illuminatis, the Khazarians. I don't know that. I do believe that the leadership is centered around the Rockefellers and Rothschilds. I can't tell you what their exact agendas are, but I've got a pretty good idea of what's going on. Now, generally, if you think about these wealthy families, their idea is to make more. The more money they have, the greedier they get. It's just, I think, a part of human nature. Now, one of the things you have to do is if you want to control something, is to make it, if you want to control the world, the best way to do that is to have a one world government where you only have to bribe a couple of people at the top to make your agenda go through. So all of this has to do with a pyramidal power structure, and at the top you have this very nebulous type of New World Order organization. I cannot swear or confirm of their existence or their agendas, but one thing I can tell you, Kerry, is that when you look at all of the substantial effects upon people, it is all primarily geared for transferring wealth from the poor to the rich.
Right.
And I can give you some examples of that if you would like.
Yeah, please tell us your interpretation of this. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the drug trade. Okay. Now, and always keep in your mind that the bankers always love to get their annual 6%. Okay. Now, let's suppose that the New World Order people bribe our CIA. They go ahead and create this opium fields in Afghanistan. They get it smuggled through U.S. military into the United States, maybe through Mexico. Okay. Now what we do is we have all these cheap drugs. We get a lot of kids out there addicted, and they're going to go steal to get money, to pay for them drugs that get accumulated in the middlemen and the higher ups, and eventually gets laundered through the banks. And that's where the banking cabal takes its 6% cut. Okay. Mm-hmm. So it's hard for most people to draw that connection that I just enumerated, but it is there, and I believe that it is real. This McCabe, FBI, I think he was the deputy director that was just fired.
And acting director at one point.
Right. Now, he for some reason, was on the board of HSBC, who I understand goes back all the way to the Chinese Opium Wars.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so here we have a deep state operative in the U.S. who is controlling a bank, who's taking their 6% off the drug addiction trade. Now, I think that's criminal, but that is just an example, and I can give you many, of how this New World Order sucks wealth, because the wealth is going from the addict and the robbery victim. Okay, that's the wealth, and it's being transferred up into the global banking cabal. Okay, and the Rothschilds, of course, are all over them. Now we could talk about. Now there's other ways of implementing this wealth transfer. Fiat devaluations, market manipulations, drug laundering, drug money laundering, which I just mentioned, taxes, debt, trade, immigration, healthcare, agriculture, automobiles, subprime auto, subprime housing, and imprisonment. These, what I just enumerated, basically touch everybody's lives in a big way. Now, we could talk about fiat devaluation as another example, if you would like me to, Kerry.
Yeah, sure. Just get into the inflation, currency inflation. How is that a tool of the global elite to bring about one world government and to control everyone and take your money?
Well, if fiat devaluation, we're really talking about inflation. You got a guy sitting there on 15 hours barely making enough to feed his face, pay rent. Okay. He takes his wage and he gets knocked 6% of inflation. Okay. Now that comes right out of his wealth, his buying power. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's immediate and it's felt, and there's nothing he can do about it. Now the fat cat that's sitting there that has all kinds of properties. Okay. His assets are going up in nominal price. In other words, he's keeping up with inflation. Okay, he doesn't lose with inflation.
Correct.
Whereas the guy who is on the low end scale is going to be hurt, and that's why this inflation, it hurts mostly wages, savings, and pensions. Okay, mm-hmm. I'm sure that Rothschild is not worried about a Kmart pension. Okay,
yeah,
and they have to, of course, have certain amounts of cash. But basically, by holding assets primarily, they avoid the ravenous effects of inflation that hurt basically the middle and lower class. They basically have destroyed the middle class in this country.
Sure.
And it's funny how the tax rate, they say, well, we want a progressive tax rate because we want to tax the rich to kind of compensate for it. And I go, wait a minute. There's already half the people of the country don't pay any income tax at all. And what's happening is that point of taxation is actually being shifted up into the higher percentage of folks. But taxes are really just a ruse. They do not, in a significant way, undo the income inequality that has been basically primarily caused by the Federal Reserve System that was created in 1913. Debt, we know about interest. trade. You instead of having a powerful middle class in the United States, they shift the jobs overseas, and now you have where there's lower wages being earned, thus higher profitability, thus transferring wealth from those people who own foreign corporations. And again, the banking cabal is all over the big corporations. They're all over the big banks. Well, they're global, and they have their their reach.
Of course.
So, it's this. We could talk about market fluctuations. I mean, the subprime.
I think time is going to prevent us from going more in depth, but we'll definitely have you back on. So here's the thing. You mentioned pre-call that you were upset because I said there's no solution to these problems. And what I meant by that is not that the solutions don't exist. It's that the solutions are very plausible and will work. But unfortunately, the country has been so dumbed down and the political system so co-opted that implementing these solutions is a near impossibility under the present state of mind, state of consciousness, state of the economy of the majority of voters. The idea of privatizing Social Security and changing public pension plans, all these things, there's solutions that you and I both know as libertarians and free market economists will work, but they are unacceptable to the vast majority of people because there is a lack of intellectual capacity that's by design. By design, these people have been dumbed down and can't accept solutions and understand that changes have to be made in your lifestyle, in your standard of living, in your whole life. As a consumer, it's not going to be what it was. So how do we implement these solutions here?
First of all, my hat's off to you, Mr. Lutz, for nailing that on the head about it is a planned dumbing down. You were right on target. And again, I go back to the international banking cabal. For the listeners who would visit my webpage, under positions, there's a tab called solutions. And I go through and I list, and I think there's like about 72 items that would solve most of the problems. But I make the caveat that these solutions will not be implemented unless there's a crisis that will provide the political will to do so. As a U.S. Senator, I'm going to solve the immigration problem. I'm going to solve the imprisonment problem, and then I'm going to go after corruption. Because when you go after corruption and you defeat that, you can return prosperity, and a lot of these problems that we have will naturally fall to the ground as a consequence of eliminating corruption in D.C. So I invite your users to check out my webpage, Derrick, DERRICKM, Reid, REID.com.
All right, and we'll have a link to it in the show notes to this interview, as we always do. Hey, while you're at it, take a look at financialsurvivalnetwork.com site. Hundreds of articles a day. We aggregate hundreds a week, I should say, dozens a day. Check out our Twitter feed at Kerry Lutz. Email us, kl@kerrylutz.com. The Facebook page for now, till they ban us, is Financial Survival Network. Derrick, wish you the best of luck. You got some common sense approaches for an era that lacks common sense approaches to anything, personal and public. Wish you the best of luck, fellow libertarian. Hope that you really kick some ass. What day is the California primary?
June 5th. That's next Tuesday, I believe.
Oh, my God. Right around the corner. You got 8 days. Get out there for Derrick. We don't usually make political endorsements, but in this case, we're going to do a major exception. And Derrick, good luck. We'll talk to you again soon, my friend.
Thank you very much, Kerry, for having me on.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.